Okay, I'd like to introduce you to Kate. Get rid of that. Kate Price is the Executive Director of the Action for Coalition on Human Trafficking, short form ACT. She's a seasoned fundraiser and a nonprofit strategist that is passionate about social impact work. Over the last 15 years, she has worked at the intersection of altruism and innovation, raising millions for Canadian charities. She has held executive leadership roles with Discovery House Family Violence Prevention Society and Fort Calgary National Historic Site, and led Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity's flagship fundraiser, the Midsummer Ball Weekend. She previously sat on the board of directors for the National Access Arts Centre, Canada's largest disability arts organization. Kate holds a Bachelor of Commerce from Royal Roads University, her Certified Fundraising Executive designation, and is an MBA candidate with the University of Calgary. Thank you, and nice to meet you, Kate.
Nice to meet you and to meet everyone. It's so lovely to be here and to see everyone on this call on a Sunday night showing up for it, and of course to be joining other incredible speakers, and of course Kelly, who I do have the privilege of working with in a survivor inclusion working group, who I am learning from every day. I wanted to share a little bit about ACT Alberta, what we do, why we do it, that kind of thing, and why I'm here today. But I also wanted to share a couple trends that we're seeing on the ground. I think that often in these panels, we spend a lot of time just doing sort of preliminary information about human trafficking. So I did want to share a little bit more details about things that we're seeing that's shifting. But if anyone needs further context, by all means, let me know. So ACT Alberta, which of course stands for the Action Coalition on Human Trafficking, we are a frontline service delivery organization. We operate across the province of Alberta to provide direct supports to survivors of both forced labor and sexual exploitation. We have 3 core pillars of service. First is prevention, to be able to do anti-trafficking training and education, anything we can do to help raise awareness, but also to work with different industries that are the most likely to intersect with victims or survivors of trafficking at different points in their journey. We also do response, which is, of course, the frontline case management. And that's where we really try to meet the immediate and long-term needs of survivors. And then we also do mobilization, which is anything to do with collective action. So if we have the chance to share knowledge or resources, learn from a different agency, maybe approach a program as a collective instead of just one-on-one, that's sort of that lane of work. I've been with the organization for about 2.5 years. I'm not a social worker, and I wanted to be really candid about that. That the way that I see the work is from a systems thinking point of view, operational, how we all work together. But I did want to be candid because I think that there's a specialization around social work and around being frontline that I often get credit for without actually having the experience in. So I wanted to be transparent about that. But some of the things that we're really noticing on the front line through our specialized case management is really about the immediate needs of survivors. So when we work with survivors of forced labor or sexual exploitation, we often find that their immediate needs are around housing, and around 76% of our clients need immediate access to crisis housing or emergency housing. There are real challenges around referring a client to emergency shelters, where although they seem the most intuitive answer, can often be a challenging space that can lead to re-victimization, particularly because some traffickers, at least in Alberta, are particularly targeting emergency shelters because of the apparent vulnerabilities of the folks who are accessing them. So looking for other elements of crisis housing, things like that. All of our clients always need access to food because many of them don't have Canadian documentation. They can't actually get to food shelters and food banks. So they're one of those rare demographics that will fall immediately through those cracks. And then a lot of folks who need access to immigration paperwork and applications and subsidized counseling services. And because ACT Alberta is one of the few agencies in Alberta that supports folks who've experienced forced labor, our statistics are completely different than most of the other organizations across Canada, and very different from the national stats on the prevalence of human trafficking. So for us, from around 55 to 70% of our clients in 2023 experienced forced labor. About 5% experienced a combination of forced labor and sexual exploitation, and the remainder experienced sexual exploitation in any form. So we have a strange client demographic in the sense that nationally, the statistics suggest closer to 95% of people who have experienced human trafficking experience sexual exploitation. And what we found on the ground is that those statistics are often misinformed. I think you'll hear a lot about that today probably, is that the data is very hard to rely on because so few people can report. And with folks who've experienced forced labor, they almost exclusively are of international origin and come through on a temporary foreign worker permit, and often have a closed work permit that means that they can't exit the dynamic with their employer, or they'll lose their permit. And this means that a lot of folks essentially just choose not to report. I also wanted to share really quick, I know we don't have a ton of time. Some of the other elements that we're really noticing is a lot of cross-border recruitment where folks are recruiting at sort of a package deal. So the employer, who's, if in the case of forced labor, the employer, the immigration consultant, and the recruiter will work collectively as a group to be able to recruit folks from different countries into Canada to have access to work and to come through on the temporary foreign worker advisory program. And so because of that, because it's happening outside of Canada, it can't be directly regulated. So we're really experiencing some challenges from an enforcement point of view. And we're seeing an increase in cases from small rural areas and towns. This is for a lot of reasons, but in part because it's easier to sort of, there's just less of a focus we found in rural and remote areas because there are less resources available for enforcement agencies to actually hold people accountable for illegal activity. And sometimes there's just less of a culture of it within more rural areas. And also just limited access to services and support. And so we found the more that we do outreach and engagement in rural and remote areas, the more we receive increased referrals in those areas. Okay. I only wanted to share a couple more quick updates that I'm really seeing on the ground. So for folks, this is tricky because I know that many of you may not have learned anything about human trafficking yet, so this might be too detailed. And I do generally apologize if that's the case. But I do want to share that, like at an agency level, at a funder level, there's a lot of interest in supporting anti-trafficking work, and there's a lot of public messaging around supporting anti-trafficking work. And it just is a bit more complicated boots on the ground to access it and to confirm multi-year funding and to confirm funding for partner organizations. So a lot of immigration and newcomer agencies are losing their funding right now, and they're a critical partner in frontline service delivery response and prevention work, because language barriers are a huge challenge for everyone working in anti-trafficking work. And this is the last thing I want to say is this.
You've
One
got
of the
about 4 minutes, Kate. You're okay. You've got about 3 or 4 minutes. No problem.
Perfect.
Yeah, take your time.
So I could do this for an hour, and I'm just trying to make sure I stay within my 10 minutes. Part of the wonderful work that we're able to do with the survivor inclusion, like the National Ethical Survivor Inclusion Working Group, is to discuss more in detail on how agencies can do a better job of putting survivor voices at the forefront of our work. Anti-trafficking agencies are often inadvertently self-focused in the way that we talk about our work, right? Because we're in that work every day. There's a lot of savior mentalities that can sometimes leak in, where people mean well and they're passionate about the work, but they want to save someone instead of provide services to or provide a platform for their voices. And that balance is really tricky. And I have not been perfect at it. And we continue to learn how to do that in a better and more impactful way over time. But it is one of those things that we always hope the public can know about and pay attention to, is when you're looking at supporting and engaging with anti-trafficking agencies and supporting their work, check to see if anything that they're doing is actually elevating survivor voices You know, like check to see if survivors are directly engaged in their work, if their voices are being promoted in a way that feels exploitative, or is it promoted in a way where they feel like they have a platform available to them? And there's a lot of nuance there, and it's something that we're really working on to improve over time. But I definitely want to say thank you to the people, to the other speakers on this call, because of how much I've been able to learn from them about that nuance and continuing to grow and evolve over time to better support it. But I did want to bring one final thing, which is how challenging it can be to include survivors in some of the mechanisms of anti-trafficking work in agencies because of how we're structured. And I wanted to give an example. And I'm not saying that that's an excuse, to be very clear, but that is just to provide a bit of context. So as ACT Alberta strives to develop better trauma-informed mechanisms to support survivors and to provide them a better platform to provide feedback to the actual what we're doing, like are services working, are they what they need, but also to support in a governance way, like to actually drive the strategy of the organization, because of we should really only exist and be driven by the needs of survivors. And this can have some challenges around, for example, in a nonprofit's bylaws, often board members can't be paid. However, it's very important for us to pay survivors for their expertise as a consultant, because if we're asking them to lead and to provide critical feedback, that is consultant work, and that should be paid. And that can create a challenge with trying to find a way to incorporate survivor voices on the board of directors. And so there are things like that, which is I'm always learning about and trying to drill down on, and wanting to identify more tactical and strategic ways to do it, to ensure that that is just a small hurdle that we then bump over, and that where it doesn't just stop there for survivor inclusion. So I think I should stop there, and this is kind of a question to Kelly and to the group and to Pauline, is to what extent you want us to provide a bit of an overview of any of the human trafficking, like what it looks like in Canada, or are you hoping, yeah. So I just wanted to stop there to see if you did want to provide more feedback on that.
I think what we'll do is we'll get our presentations, we'll get Samantha up next, and then we can go back when we get to our question period, because I think we'll have some time there.
That sounds great.
So
Thank you so much for some time.
Thank you very much. Gareth, did you want to go over the housekeeping there for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely.
I see you put it in the chat, but go ahead.
I did. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure it was in there. But yeah, if we have a couple minutes, I just wanted to direct everyone there for the chat, as Kelly was mentioning at the beginning there. If there are any questions, absolutely throw them into the chat. I know a few people have. The questions will be kept, and I will record them, and we will attempt and try our best to answer them at the end after all the presenters have gone. However, if we are not in a position, we do not have time on our Sunday evening to get to them, I have recorded them and will respond via email afterwards. The other thing as well is if there's any content today, as it can be a triggering or heavy topic, please be assured to take the time you need, self-care, whatever that may look like for you. And on that note, as some of the content of the topics today, it is intellectual property of those presenting. So we do want to be very mindful and reiterate for everyone that this is the intellectual property of the presenters, and there is not permission or consent to distribute, copy this, or take it and use it as you wish. You will need direct permission. So I just wanted to have that as well, as we will be going over some good content today. And as anything, I am here just a little bit of help in the background. So if anyone needs any help on anything, just fire me a direct message there into the chat. Thanks, Pauline.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, next I'm going to introduce Samantha McNeil. Samantha is a registered nurse and a sexual assault nurse examiner with 24 years of experience working with victims, survivors, and individuals at risk of sexual violence, domestic violence, and sex trafficking. She is also the nurse advisor of the Peel Anti-Human Sex Trafficking Strategy with the region of Peel. She has experience working in public health, clinical settings, and with the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. Samantha supported the development of the Region of Peel's anti-human sex trafficking strategy and provides clinical training on human sex trafficking to healthcare providers across Ontario. Samantha is a strong social justice activist and change maker. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pauline, and to Kelly and to Gareth, the Business and Professional Women's Organization, as well as my fellow speakers today. So again, I would echo everyone else that has spoken about everyone coming on today and sharing space and time with us. So as Pauline had explained, I am the nurse advisor of the Peel Anti-Human Sex Trafficking Strategy, and we're situated in Brampton, Ontario, and I work for a regional government. So that's my, I guess, one of the main hats that I'm wearing today. And I also have the pleasure and I'm just very proud to be a part of the national ethical movement as well with Kate and Alexandra and Kelly and others, because we really do feel, as we gather together in this space and in this sector, the importance of engaging with individuals who have a breadth and wealth of knowledge and expertise to be able to move the needle forward. So individuals that, like me, that have been working in the field for quite some time, have that experience of working with individuals, but we don't have the same lived experience. And that's why any opportunity we have, we want to elevate those voices and include them in a meaningful and ethical way. So I will give a little bit of an overview of our strategy as a regional government, as well as some of the work that we're doing with the national ethical movement, and as well as Kate, some trends we're seeing in Ontario as well. So we're the first regional government kind of from where we see it in Ontario and beyond, that has taken on a priority to address human sex trafficking. We chose sex trafficking as opposed to overarching trafficking, as we were seeing that was a very high need in our region. We are a suburban area of Toronto. We are immigrant or newcomer majority. So we have various different individuals that have come from different parts of the world and have settled here in Peel. And we're close to the Pearson Airport, so an international airport. And what we find is individuals that come to Canada, specifically in Toronto, we are right in that vicinity of the airport, and individuals settle in and around the airport area. Our strategy framework is built on 3 pillars: so prevention, interventions, and exits and housing. And where we differ a little bit from other government or regional municipal government strategies is that we have taken the approach that we not only have a strategy and a theory of how things should be done, but we also have dedicated services that the region has funded. And so with the interventions pillar, we have a integrated services hub, which is a wraparound multi-support, multi-service organization that serves individuals over the age of 12. And we know that this, to Kate's point, with regards to data, there's a lot of data that talks about being a female is the highest risk factor for becoming a victim or survivor of sex trafficking. And as you work in this field, you really do start to realize, and again, I'll echo what Kate had talked about, in that somebody that looks like me, who's English speaking, who's lived in Canada their whole life, who is able to navigate the services that we have to offer. Oftentimes we're the individuals that are able to disclose to police, and that's how we become a statistic. Those individuals that have barriers to engaging with police don't become a statistic by virtue of the fact that they have barriers to reporting to police, systemic racism, colonization, various different elements that would impede them from being able to become a statistic. And oftentimes I reflect on language, and I feel very strongly that language matters. And I'm always constantly reflecting on my language. And I've heard so often in the media, don't become a statistic. But in this situation, we want individuals to become a statistic, because that means that they have had the ability to break down those barriers, or individuals have walked alongside them to notice these barriers and to be able to move them aside so that individuals can report, so that our services can become a lot more aware, and B, that we can raise that element to say, you know, we're missing a lot of people, and this is why we think that it's only females or that it's only white females. So in the work that we do, the individuals that have engaged with Encourage, the letter N, and then Courage is the name of our wraparound hub. And what we've noticed is that 45% of individuals that have accessed our service are among a member of a racialized community. And another element to this is also that we have engaged individuals that identify as male and gender diverse. So, you know, identify with the 2S LGBTQ2+ community. Again, there are a number of barriers that will impede individuals from being able to feel safe in the system. So whether that's health or legal, justice, support, you know, social support services. And so we really do look at who we're serving, but also who we're not serving and why that might be, and then ensure that we're working and building relationships with culturally specific organizations, with organizations that engage with males that have been sexually assaulted or have engaged in sexual or have experienced sexual violence, as well as 2S LGBTQ2+ centric organizations as well, to ensure that we become embedded in those communities and have service providers who have lived experience, who have lived in their color of skin, in their culture, in their religion, in their gender identification, to ensure that we are, again, paving ways and paving pathways to ensure that everyone feels comfortable and safe to be able to disclose. And we also feel that your engagement with police, or how you choose to approach the crime that has been committed against you, is yours and yours alone. And there is no coercion to involve police. The services are exactly the same, whether an individual chooses to involve police or not. We feel that they are the experts in their own circumstances and their own situation. And if they choose to disclose to police at some point in time, then that's okay. But it's really about identifying the goal for that individual and then working towards providing those services that will support that individual's goals. So not our goals as healthcare providers or as social service providers, but as the individual and what they feel their most pressing issue is. And then we provide the suite of services to them. And then exits in housing. Again, I feel very proud of our regional government to have taken on funding not only the infrastructure, the capital costs for 2 houses, a safe house and a transitional house, but also the operational costs. So housing workers that are trained in cultural competency, anti-oppressive, trauma-informed, violence-informed, survivor-centric programming, as well as ensuring that the positions that are available to individuals also have a rubric to be able to identify lived experience as one of those elements that would be welcomed in a job description, and then merit given to that expertise, just as we would formalized education or years of experience in the field itself. So we have a safe house, which individuals, anyone over the age of 16, and that's due to legislation that is female identifying. And again, to Kate's point, knowing that dedicated services are often targeted by traffickers and recruiters are sent in to re-recruit individuals. We know that best practice has shown us that on average, 6 individuals co-locating in an environment and individuals that identify as female co-locating at the same time is what we have identified as best practice for our program. And those individuals can live for up to 6 months in this location. And I should have brought pictures, but they are model homes. They are beautiful. They are not shelters. They look absolutely the opposite of what a shelter would look like. And we feel very strongly that these homes that are embedded in neighborhoods that they receive just as nice of an environment as anyone should. And it really does mean something where you can give somebody their own room, their own comforter they get to choose from. They can close the door if they want some private time. And like I say, I'm just very proud of the fact that they are a trauma-informed environment where people can relax, debrief, and engage in services outside of the home. We also don't do programming on site because I get to go home to my own home and no one's coming in unless I choose to have them in to access support. So we feel the same for the individuals that are engaged with our houses. And then we also have a transitional house where, again, anyone over the age of 16 that's female identifying, and it's up to 6 people at any given time, can live there for 2 years. And that is really to bridge the gap relating to, going from crisis to stabilization and then working their way to independence, but having the opportunities to apply for and engage with priority status housing, with rent geared to income options for subsidy, as well as 2 dedicated housing workers that will help that individual on their path to independence as well. And then the region, my role is really to elevate this model and share it with other municipalities across Ontario as well as across Canada, not as a cookie cutter, because it really has to be informed by the community that it will be in, and we are there to offer the idea and the model and kind of our best practices. We've written a guide and to share our best practices with other communities, and then to provide oversight, financial and program oversight of the housing and the intervention pillars, as well as to do a lot of prevention work. So I felt very strongly that we couldn't go out and tell everybody else what to do before our own house was in order. So we have trained 60% of our own regional staff on what the red flags are for individuals that may be at risk or being exploited through sex trafficking as well. So we have an e-learning module to raise awareness. And then we also have frontline training to 2-hour intensive training for all of our housing workers, our Ontario Works financial support workers, as well as our childcare fee subsidy workers, because we know that they are engaging with individuals who are at risk or who don't feel safe to disclose at this time. And their practice needs to be trauma informed. And once we train them, their faces kind of just drop like, oh, I know I've missed people, or I know I've been really rude to people and I shouldn't have, because I, thought, well, you have your nails done and you have your hair done, so you don't need our financial support. But what they don't know is they're a commodity and they're being bought and sold. And so by virtue of doing this work with our own service providers, we have created safe spaces where individuals can not only, if they choose to disclose, they can, but really access supports that are much lower barrier and have dignity and compassion at the root of all of the services that we provide. The last point that I'm going to touch on very quickly is we have also written a remuneration policy or strategy framework for engaging with individuals with lived experience and paying them as ethical consultants to the work, and really working out a rubric, again, to provide opportunity for individuals that have such a vast skill set and portfolio that we need to be able to do the work that we are doing effectively and ethically. So that's something that will be to come. We're just getting it finalized, and it is being shared with our national ethical movement. And I'm happy to share that with anyone who would want to see it. So thank you again very much for the time and the opportunity. And I'm going to pass it back to Pauline.
Thank you, Samantha. That's great. Up next, we have Alexandra. Alexandra Ford is an experienced independent consultant and renowned expert specializing in critical issues such as human trafficking, trauma recovery, consent advocacy, healthy relationships, and gender-based violence. Her journey through childhood abuse, substance dependency, and exploitation uniquely equips her to address these challenging topics. Combining academic expertise with a talent for injecting humor into difficult conversations, Alexandra is a sought-after speaker and consultant. Her approach sparks engaging discussions and fosters empathy on complex subjects. Passionate about meaningful dialogue, strategic foresight, and ethical survivor engagement, Alexandra is dedicated to preventing trauma and promoting resilience at all levels. The floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very much for that. And I think everyone has probably seen my kids possibly pop up or see me pop in and off on and off the screen. And I just want to, I want to talk about that for a second.
We're happy you're here. We're glad to have you.
I talked to Kelly before this, and I'm going to have to go with probably the most informal talk that I have ever given as I'm trying to navigate this, but I think it really speaks to something that is close to my heart and probably exemplifies it, which is speaking as a survivor. And so I will disclose I'm a survivor of trafficking. I was trafficked in Ontario in 2007. It's historical, and I've been now working in the anti-trafficking movement for, sorry, just mommy needs a moment. Thank you. Okay, for almost 10 years. And there's a couple things I found since moving into the anti-exploitation movement as a survivor. And one of the things is that survivors, we often need to be beyond reproach. There is, as soon as we disclose that we're a survivor, there is this lens that people now look at us through. And it's like, are you healed enough? So anytime you make what is considered a misstep by whoever is looking at you through that lens, whether you end a relationship or you have a child not married, or something that is considered like, oh, we're just going to tack that under the, she's still kind of a problem, or she still doesn't have things together. So there is this need to kind of really separate your home life or whatever is going on in your personal life and show up in a professional way, in the most professional way, because there is, I can speak personally, like an abject terror that if somebody finds out that you've made a misstep or have some mess in your personal life or something like that, that people are going to chalk it up to a complete lack of professionalism, a lack of knowing what to do and how to do it. Where in reality, everybody who works in any field has stuff going on at home. It's expected. But when we walk through our professional life with our personal leading it, and the most personal parts of our life, we lead with that. There is an expectation that, well, we've buttoned that up so everything else is now perfect. Or there's an expectation that everything that's happening in our personal life now is up for discussion because we lead with so much of our personal history forward. So I think that's something, we heard from Kate and Sam talking about the importance of survivor inclusion in this movement. And I think we need to, as a movement, it has to stop being that thing we say and stop being that thing that we actually do and do properly, because it has been so mishandled. It continues to be so mishandled. The amount of exploitation that I have experienced since entering the anti-exploitation movement boggles my mind. From being asked to fly literally to Atlanta, Georgia to speak for a gala that was multiple hundreds of dollars a head and multiple thousands of attendees, and they were going to pay me in a meal. I had to pay, I was expected to pay my own flight and accommodation and all of that, but I would get a free meal when I spoke. And I remember trying to ask them, saying, like, how does this make sense? And they're like, well, we're raising money for survivors of trafficking. Like, you wouldn't want to take any money away from those. And I remember saying, I'm a survivor of trafficking, but yeah, but you're not where these people are. Okay, so I'm too healed, but it would be unethical for you to ask someone who is literally just steps away from their exploitation to speak at this gala. So there needs to be more, like, absolutely the way we are beginning to treat, I think, survivors who are currently in their exiting process in a more wraparound approach, from mental health to physical health to understanding, legal entanglements, financial well-being, all of that. There needs to be a wraparound approach for how we're handling survivor engagement when we're talking about within the anti-exploitation movement, because I think there is an expectation from survivors that you're so passionate about this subject, you shouldn't expect to be paid. And I think a lot of us, haggling for money it can be pretty triggering. It can be pretty triggering to try and explain to someone why you should value what I bring to the table and why I don't want to be paid less, and I think I should be paid more, and realize that if I say no, like this is my expectation of payment, the amount of times I've then been told, oh, I'll go find someone who's cheaper, which to me is like, I'll go exploit one of your sisters.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely brutal. So I won't, I now have a tiny human who has joined me. And I think that's probably the best place for me to leave it at now. And I do appreciate, I'm not going to apologize, but I will thank everyone here on the panel, as well as all of the attendees, for your patience as I flash on and off screen and walk through different rooms. I'm currently living in 800 square feet of space with tiny humans. I recently became a single mom. I don't have a lot of support. So my childcare for this evening fell through, and I appreciate everyone's patience with the informality from which I speak, and my children, who are just, Thank you.
Thank you for finding the time and making the effort to speak with us. We really appreciate it. And if you need to come and go, that's totally fine. We're just happy to have you here and be able to hear your truth. So yes. So thank you, Alex. Now we'll turn the microphone back to Kelly, and she's our BPW Canada Vice President and Human Trafficking Task Force person, for her remarks before we move on to questions.
Thank you, Pauline, and thank you to my panelists who did an incredible job. It's not often that all of us have opportunity to speak on what we'd like to. Very often we're told what to speak about, we're told how to speak it, whether we're an allied NGO, service provider, civil society people, or survivor. And so it was a lot of fun starting out to put this panel together, because I don't think anyone kind of knew what to do with me, both here and at the United Nations, when I talked to those allied experts and survivors and said, talk about whatever you want to. This is the kind of dialogue that hasn't happened historically. I was trafficked when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and some of the same strategies, the same outcomes that continue to plague victims and their families, I continue to see them today. And so those in BPW that know me, and those on my board that know me, and friends that know that I really believe that there has to be a shift in the way we're approaching things, or we're going to have the same results. And somebody will be 62 years of age in 62 years, sitting here speaking in my chair about the very same issues that we didn't redress or address as the good humans in the fight against human trafficking. I'm going to be very specific, and I'm going to put this to rest. Tonight, we are not talking about sex industry. We're talking about the crimes of human trafficking and what it does, whether those are crimes of sex trafficking, whether they're labor trafficking, whether they are forced surrogacy or forced marriage, whether it is the spamming trafficking centers that we see set up, or whether it's for any other means of coercion, exploitation, or manipulation for forced commodification. And so that takes the divide out of our conversation for the evening. And I want people to know that when you have a lived experience like this, there is nothing that anybody is ever going to compare to it in any other form of violence or coercion or trauma that is going to be able to have me or Alexandra or any of my survivor sisters and brothers nod their head and say, you understand. You can empathize, but I liken it to how I've raised my son, who's Jamaican Canadian. I can watch what has happened to him in arenas and areas where he has struggled with issues of race. However, as a white privileged woman, I really can't speak to that. So what I would just encourage everyone that's on this call to do, I just finished actually today with a University of Toronto high platform that is looking to do a project across the province of Ontario. And the one misstep that they made is they didn't have a survivor and understand a survivor's capacity to support them in the creation and vetting of their project. And actually, after I sat down and we rolled through it, we found out that the very project that they were planning on rolling out across the province of Ontario would have put victims at high risk. This, I see Sam taking a deep breath. We have a lot of history, you and I, starting with Johanna back in the day. And let me tell you, what Alexandra said about survivors being imperfect is absolutely true. Just like any other person that has expertise, we are humans. However, we are experts in our field. And if you allow the privilege of survivors to enter into the areas where you believe that you could support this, I can't even tell you the synergy that would develop, the synergy that put together Project En Route with BPW, that put together ACT Alberta to now see their own premier championing Kate's work and asking her to do interviews on TV when historically the work in Alberta has been siloed. Sorry, Kate, you know me, I speak truth. And I am not controlled by government money. So I have the ability sometimes to go in where some of those that are organizationally bound by some of their contracts and their funding, you know, Sam's nodding her head again, so's Kate, that they cannot speak to certain things that organizations like Business and Professional Women can. And that's why the synergy between organizations and federations and civil society is vitally important. But you have to understand they are the front line. And they are also the high-level corporate informational people that understand the structures and infrastructures and all of those things. And then the survivors have the anecdotal data that without it, the stats mean nothing. You know, there's an old saying that numbers lie and liars use numbers. But when you attach people to those numbers, they can't be fudged because you have people that are actually validating what the numbers represent. And I think it's high time that we do not only rely on academia to give us the full picture of what's going on in the arenas of human trafficking. It is on the rise. We were supposed to have brought in 500,000 migrants into Canada last year, and for every year coming, the commitment from our government was to influx 500,000 migrants as migrant temporary workers to help fill our work gaps. We brought in 1.8 million migrants last year. We now have difficulty with our housing. We have difficulty with our healthcare. I'm not blaming migrants. Please don't hear what I'm not saying. What I'm saying is, if we want to not have the tail wag the dog, we have to get in front of this and start thinking in areas of prevention. And most of the solutions come from experienced survivors who have done this work, and some have paid the price historically. My sister friends like Trisha Bapti and Bridget Perrier and Natasha Fall and Kat and Cassandra Diamond and Renelle Bruder and Simone Bell and Jennifer Richardson, who was the first coordinator in Ontario and now works for ONWA. The survivors are willing to work together and do the work. They don't care which big box store gets the funding, as long as they're willing to share their strategies and the impact of what's working properly to help use that and point our governmental will to create a platform with some federal oversight in order that the provinces have some consistency in their delivery, even though it is specific to that geography or that community, as Samantha said. It is very important to understand that if you watch the complete series of webinars, you will see people from each province. You will see people from each community. When we engaged in Project Maple Leaf as our uptick from Project En Route, we realized that all of Canada needed information. And so we undertook during COVID to go to each provincial and territorial legislature and read statements publicly and present them to every one of our parliamentarians in Canada. That was Business and Professional Women and 180 organizational allies. And we received some marked responses. And what ended up being the benefit of it, we were able to change some things immediately in Ontario and then put some more pressure federally. The immediate uptick in Ontario was the Child and Youth Act was amended. Because of all human trafficking was being initiated in the province of Ontario. When we looked at the numbers concerning minors that were being trafficked and saw how horrific that 68 to 72% of all human trafficking being minor aged. This is the reason we fight right here on screen, is because we need to have some preventative measures and protection. And at the time in the province of Ontario, there was an emancipation clause in the provincial act for children and youth that prevented police from acting even if they were seeing human trafficking if someone was 16, 17, or 18 years of age, because pimps were training them to claim emancipation so that the police could not do anything. They were, and I mean, Gareth will tell you the telephone calls that I endured with police officers in tears because they couldn't act on this. Not that we over-police the issue, as Samantha also stated, it is a victim's right to decide if they want to be a witness. And I've actually fought to that end, wondering if I needed bail money myself at times. But it is somebody's right to make a decision. And I think it's really hard to support that decision being made when there's only 3 months of support financially really available to a human trafficking survivor who needs a lifetime of probable complex PTSD and trauma support. I still have complex PTSD. My trafficking was in the 80s. There was nothing then, there is nothing now. And so to ask somebody to go to court because they owe us, they don't owe us. We have failed them societally because 2 of the basic rights given to us and promised us in the nation of Canada under public safety, the first is safety. Do you know the second is actually happiness? I'm sorry, that's just a little ironic to me. And so as we kind of round out, and we're going to go to the questions that have been posed first, they were sent in by email. And if we don't get to all of them, please stay with us for this series. We are going to go on a journey together, and I have a feeling we might even have some add-ons to these webinars to keep an informed perspective. I want you to know that the best thing that you could do is continue to educate yourself before you form an opinion. It's the most important thing we can do. We can all have opinions and ideas of what we can do to fix this. But as I've said before, a lot of the fixes have already been outlined by survivors and just need the support of those that are willing to add voice, pen and paper, time and energy, and maybe hold a sign or 2 or write a letter to somebody or get behind something. You also need to fund your local initiatives like Kate spoke about. There, and if you would like to know whether an agency is human trafficking, trauma-informed, person-centric, understands their cultural responsibilities, geographical responsibilities, and to give perpetuity to the work that they're doing so that the funding isn't in flux. We go through this. Our national ethical movement sat down and has been talking to partners all across Canada about the flux in their funding, where for 3 years they can roll, and then the funding's pulled or it's realigned or reassigned, especially around homelessness right now. The homelessness support money, the prioritization of somebody that was trafficked into safe housing, the gaps in that, the support for substance support, addiction support, mental health support. Can I also say child support? I remember being a mom of a 3-year-old son and being exactly where Alexandra is without having the ability to explain it to others. Why do we have to explain it? And survivors are brave, but they're much more than that. They are intelligent. Some of them are in STEM trades, some are lawyers, some are doctors, some are in police organizations, some are in healthcare, some are stay-home moms, some are grandparents, some are in male roles, some are male, some identify in other gender. It is broad, and that's why it's so difficult to work in this arena, because the minute you think you have an answer for it, the traffickers will have another way to coerce, manipulate, and make money. And the bottom line is we have to remember it is all about money, power, and control. So thank you for your time. I'm going to turn it back to Pauline, who's going to work with Gareth on the questions. And then when we're done, any questions that we haven't had the opportunity to answer, we will go back together and reconvene, and we will talk. If you do stay, there was a question about trafficking of the elders. Yes, if you want to know more information, BPW International will also be hosting webinars that are coming up between now and the end of the year. We can tell you about what it looks like to traffic women just outside of the Eiffel Tower who are no longer can be trafficked, so they're forced to beg. I'm going to ask the panelists before I turn them back to Pauline, if you could, during our time in a national ethical movement, and you will hear more about this. It's the first time organizations and survivors have gotten together that are demanding parity, that in the meetings, there is a 60 to 70% representation of survivors, whether they identify or not. We have a rapporteur or a person that is well aware of who are survivors, to make sure that we have good representation and we can journey together. So my question for the panelists is, what is one thing you learned from somebody else that's here on panel while we've been in discussions at the National Ethical Movement, and you were just kind of shocked that somebody had that information? So mic's off, go ahead.
It's genuinely hard to identify just one. Like, I think that every time I'm in those meetings, everything, like, regularly, once or twice or 5 times a meeting, something will be so clearly and articulately stated that I'm like, oh yes, that makes exact sense. Why didn't I know that 30 seconds ago? And so I think sometimes having the ability to listen to survivors even articulate the issue in a very specific way, whether it's pertaining to their lived experience or not, I have found that incredibly helpful. And I'm trying to think of an exact example, but I think that's overall my experience.
I think Samantha is itching to put her mic off. I can't remember if it was you, Sam, that was asking something about boats.
Yes, yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Kelly, I mean, you illuminated that issue very well. It was the first I'd ever heard of it.
I didn't remember I knew about it till I remembered working with a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
That's trauma. That is
Yes.
what happens with trauma, is very often we don't remember what we know. Alexandra's nodding her head. until we're in the moment. Gareth, have you witnessed that also? So Pauline,
Yeah.
if you'd like to take on the questions, and let's go ahead.
Okay, all right.
Thanks, everyone.
We have a few questions already been provided here. What is the biggest myth or misrepresented work and use of money that bothers you about the human trafficking movement? And then also, what is one thing that is working? Would you like to take that one, Samantha?
Sure, I can try. Let me think here. Gosh, I have to remember that I have a regional hat on. So I think that, well, one that is very obvious and has stuck with me since inception is we have a federal strategy. And this might not be about money, but when the federal strategy came into effect or was presented, there was always supposed to be a lived experience table or advisory table that was attached to that. And sadly, that has never come to fruition. So that's one big element, is that you can't always believe what you read, and what if something says that, you know, these are the elements or the components of it, you do have to question and ask and do your research to find out if those elements have actually come to fruition. Another one is that any government or any organization has provided funding to an organization or an entity where they haven't written in that survivor voices are, you know, pivotal to that work. We still don't have a framework or anything that holds people accountable to ensuring that anything that they develop is co-developed, or at the very least survivor informed. And when I say survivor informed, it's not just asking people what they think, it's remunerating them as the expert consultants that they are. So those are the two big things I think that have sat with me and continue to sit with me. And I think that's really what's bubbling up inside of us at the National Ethical Movement is addressing some of these pieces that you would think would just be a non-issue, but we do have to come together and advocate for those elements to come to fruition.
Thank you. Great answer. This one I'm going to send to you, Kate. How is it important? How important is it to recognize and respond to human trafficking in a unilateral way, even though there are intersectional concerns in gender-based violence and other concerns in health and mental health? Can you suggest why this is important and what potential outcomes to victims would be if it is lumped into one focus or funding response?
It's such a good question and such a detailed one. I can't believe someone
Sorry,
wrote amazing
kind of
question.
tripped over it too. Well,
No,
let's break
not at
it
all.
down.
It's a really critical question, because I think that right now nationally, funding is moving towards funneling human trafficking grants and investment through the gender-based violence lens. And I can understand why, because gender-based violence is a component of human trafficking, and there is crossover between them, not only in the individuals who experience it, but also in the kind of systemic causes that make it possible. But one of the challenging things, I would say two main ones. One is that, like, for example, ACT Alberta, because 70% of our clients experience labor trafficking, 90% of that 70% are male identified people. And so while they haven't experienced gender-based violence as women or female identified folks, they've experienced human trafficking, and so wouldn't fall within that gender-based violence funding. And even that simple, like that gendered split of it is very challenging, and it also forces agencies to choose one or the other of sexual, like being able to respond to sex trafficking instances versus labor trafficking, when often there are intersections or there are similar response models that are necessary to be able to support clients properly. And that can also be challenging. And then the last part is that gender-based violence, it's tricky because it doesn't really recognize the organized crime element of sexual exploitation. And while it's not always related to organized crime, sometimes it is. And that wouldn't necessarily fall within gender-based violence, depending on how they're structuring that definition. But I would so welcome feedback from Alexandra and Kelly on that.
I was thinking that too. Alexandra, do you have anything to add to that one?
I very bluntly think that the idea of lumping it all together comes from a place of wanting to sit in comfort instead of discomfort. Those are all very uncomfortable subjects, and they're uncomfortable, and what makes them uncomfortable has a core that runs through all of it. And it's the details of each one that make it so uncomfortable we don't want to sit with it. So if you think of it as a general lump, I think it's sort of more digestible. And I think as a survivor, it's in the details and recognizing the unique experiences of specifically, you know, trafficking to GBV to all of that, that makes people feel seen and heard. And we understand it's uncomfortable to sit in that experience with someone, but that is how most of us have survived our experience with someone who was willing to sit with us in that experience and help us out of it. So I think that's sort of like a I guess very macro thing, but it's we need to be willing to sit in that discomfort and feel and look at the uniqueness to be able to address it properly and truly be what survivors and victims need.
I'd like to carry forward. I'd like to carry forward what Kate and Alexandra are both speaking to. If you go to the DSM-5, which is our diagnostic manual, to look up trauma, there is a whole section. When I do my training with healthcare providers, when I'm training police support workers, or even when I'm working with parents of 12-year-old survivors of human trafficking, whether it was intersectional between labor and both, whether it's internationally, and I'm talking to a young girl in Brazil that may have been forced to have a baby in order to get money from government, so she's subjugated to forced surrogacy. There is a difference in the type of trauma. And although on the first 15 points in the trauma manuals and diagnostic tools, they share common intersectional points with gender-based violence, there's a whole other page that is added to those especially engaged and forced and coerced in sex trafficking or forced surrogacy, forced marriages, those types of trafficking, that there's a whole page of outliers that are telling about their trauma that will be completely disregarded and missed in our approach to care and support human trafficking survivors. So they would get the care and support that somebody that's experienced domestic violence, gender-based violence, or as I still like to call it, violence against women and girls. I'm not adverse to using that phrase when I'm working with women and girls. I'm not gender, I'm not shutting down any gender dialogues, but the majority of my work, that's what I do. And so when I'm working with women and girls, I have to acknowledge that there's those pieces of their neurology, their emotional existence, their physical self, and their spirits that have been affected by this. To the credit of Indigenous communities, they also recognize this, that it's a whole person that has been affected. And if I had a broken arm and you were treating me for a broken leg, shame on you. So that's my challenge, is that it's very easy for us to just say, and you've heard repeatedly today, that a lot of those that are victims of human trafficking are placed in shelters because of a lack of provision for care for them when we've already failed them as a community to keep persons safe from criminals. We're talking about the criminal aspect of this. And now we're talking about the care. So if we're going to lump the care in one pocket, as Alexandra said, just to make ourselves feel more comfortable, we are failing. And we are going to see a bigger infiltration into shelters and into communities where those that need safe healing places and safety from gender-based violence infiltrated by human trafficking recruiters. It's not enough. It's not the right kind of care. And working with over 850 minor aged survivors, I can tell you that majority of them that have gone through shelters had less than care because the shelters are not equipped to only have 6 persons there and have staff only dealing with human trafficking concerns. So that's my rant.
I wouldn't exactly call it a rant. Okay, what can organizations do to support human trafficking efforts in prevention in all areas? Maybe this, I think Kate had a little smirk there, so maybe she has the answer for this one.
I was actually thinking about Sam and her work.
Oh, were you? Okay.
Yeah, in the sense that I think, actually, yeah, I'd love
no
to tag
problem. Flip
Sam
it
in.
over.
Is that okay?
No
Yeah, it's great.
problem. That's
No
fine.
problem.
Absolutely. I would say that for the work that we have done, the one element that we really try to ingrain in all organizations is first to receive safe, trauma-informed, trusted, reliable training. And have a couple of people do a train the trainer. So I'm part of the Peel Human Trafficking Service Providers Committee, which is a cross-sectoral committee of over 80 organizations in Peel and the Greater Toronto area. And we offer that as a free service. One of us will go with another, and we provide that training. And then what we ask is that those individuals that have access to the training go back to their own organization and truly train others. And there is also a call to action that a protocol is developed within the organization to ensure that if there's red flags that are identified, if there's someone who does disclose, whether it's domestic servitude, labor trafficking, sex trafficking, or really any exploitation, that there's a protocol in which every staff member, every volunteer is aware of and knows what to do in those situations. So we are always looking out for, and we talk about this quite often, that none of us will be able to end human trafficking. None of us will be able to combat human trafficking, but I'm a huge supporter of disrupting. And I talk to neighbors and friends and parents at school and various different people, that anybody really that will listen. Because as soon as you start this dialogue in your professional and your social circles, it's less than 1 degree of separation. People will say, oh my gosh, my niece's friend on her baseball team, or my nephew's, somebody on his band, or whatever it is. Individuals will say, oh my gosh, I know of somebody. And it's really that element of being aware of what this is and that it is happening in our backyards, and also to provide that element of, what do I do if I'm confronted with this, or if somebody I know is a victim or survivor of exploitation. So that would be my best response. I don't know, Kate, if you have additional information, and Kelly to share, as well as Alex.
I just want to say that we're coming short on time. I got the notice from Gareth. We have probably 5 more questions through the chat and 8 more that we had sent in. We do have 4 more opportunities to answer all these questions. So I think, Pauline, you can round us up to thank everybody on the way out, but I think I'd like to pose back to us right now, to everybody here, And Gareth, I'm going to open it up so you can respond to this as well, because you have worked in this through probation and parole. We've actually worked on case files together for the benefit of survivors in your previous role, now as the president of Courage for Freedom. But I would ask, one thing that our panelists would offer that, and I'm going to go first, so sorry, you can't steal my thunder. But one thing that you would ask that everybody do tomorrow in order to start their journey to be an ally, and it can be something really simple, really complex, or anything in the middle, knowing that you've got a lot of business and professional women that work in advocacy, that watch government, that are engaged in local activities in their community. So my first response to tell those that are here with us, and in gratitude, I would ask you to Google the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking website. I would ask you to read not only the signs, but know the behaviors. And I'd ask you to equip yourselves to be the eyes and ears, to be the red light cameras in your community, to start some prevention, and put the hotline number into your cell phone, and don't be afraid to call it, and just educate yourself and continue to have the conversations. So I will turn it next to Gareth, and then Pauline, you can take us through our three esteemed panelists to close us off with the same question.
All right, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so speaking myself, definitely from the male perspective, from an ally perspective, working in hand as much as I can with Kelly, because we all know how Kelly can work. The one thing I would say honestly is to understand how to hold those in positions of authority, which can be broad, hold them accountable to the aspect that this is a reality, this is an ongoing reality, and this is something that needs to be addressed from both the female and male, and all genders included. But it is not just a woman's issue, because it impacts them statistically higher. This is also a male issue. This is a male issue because we are the perpetrators, because we statistically are the demographic of buyers as well. So I would just kind of put that out on how to challenge in whatever way, formally, informally, politically, non-politically, but just challenge those that are in a position of authority and power to address this, because it is being overlooked. And as Alexandra said, it is something that is uncomfortable, and nobody wants to be uncomfortable. So let's push them into it. But thank you, Pauline.
Thank you, lady. Thank you, Gareth. Okay. Kate, you're on the my left-hand side here. Any closing comments for us? Do you have an action plan for tomorrow?
I think yes to everything everyone has already said. Educate yourself is always the best choice. And I think there's two things about that. One is, just because you did one course or read one thing, always try to find one more. Always try to find a variety of voices. Diversity of opinions is really helpful, because this is a very nuanced crime, and it's a nuanced lived experience, and it's different for each person. And the other part I'd say is try to avoid trauma tourism. So try to not looking for the most sensationalized story, but instead look for the most accurate evidence and information and learn. And that, I think, overall has more impact.
Great, thank you. Samantha?
That's a hard act to follow. Kate, that was so poignant. Kudos to you. Absolutely. Very poignant. I would say, this is a hard one. There's so many things. I guess in my realm, I would advocate for let's start with hospital or primary care, physicians and nurses and social workers and nurse practitioners don't know enough about what human trafficking is. There is a lot of talk about trauma-informed environments. However, in my 24 years, I run into colleagues all the time that don't realize or don't want to believe that this is happening right here, right in our own communities, and ensuring that spaces are safe. Disclosure is never the goal. The goal is to provide trauma-informed, survivor-centric care and support. And the evidence does show, and through, that many individuals that are trafficked accessed healthcare during their trafficking and were never asked about exploitation. And so if there is an ability to approach your healthcare organizations to make sure that this is mandated training for all frontline service providers, because I feel like this is the one element where individuals they will come in. They'll come in with broken bones, or they'll come in with a sexually transmitted infection. They'll come in with various different issues to be addressed. And it's like a provider having a blindfold on and a survivor having something over their mouth. If we're not asking the right questions, we're not providing a space for individuals to disclose, and to know that this is a safe space to come back to if they choose to disclose in the future.
That's great. Thank you. Alexandra, would you like to give your closing comments?
Absolutely. I will start by saying, like first thought, go to the Canadian Centre to End Human. Okay, Kelly touched that. Everything everyone has said was kind of where I would have gone. Absolutely. So all of those things. What I will add is two things that are linked. Is one, challenge within yourself or within a conversation with a friend or partner. Challenge your idea of what a victim looks like. Because I think there's so much, especially when we talk about human trafficking, because it's so misunderstood of what it can look like, the idea of what makes an innocent victim, and therefore how much empathy one deserves, how many services, how many offers of help. When you look at victims of trafficking, so often we have experienced, coercive criminalization, or whatever it is we did to survive, or while coerced or basically brainwashed, it's kind of held against us as like, well, you chose your choice. Or as soon as someone turns 18, well, now we call it something entirely different because they're an adult, they can make their choices. So I think if you can take some time to challenge yourself and what you think of defines a victim, and be willing to broaden that, will go so far as to helping people who may have originally remained in the shadows needing help feel like they can be seen. And I will, with that, add a challenge as well, as challenging what, or at least thinking about what you think of when you think of the word consent, and how that can be skewed and nuanced. Because we think of consent, it's giving permission, but is it giving permission if that's the only thing you think you can do? Is it giving permission if that's what you were taught to do from a very young age, and now that's the only thing you know how to do? Is it giving permission if the only way you choose to do that, make that choice, is because it's an avoidance of violence or it's a survival tactic? And I think when we start having conversations about the understanding between the differences in the continuum between consent and compliance and coercion and then full control, is when we start being able to break down sort of that mindset of the why that people always want to know. And that's how we make that human connection and extend that empathy to people who need it most.
That's great. Well said. Thank you very much. For my BPW ladies, I have 2 resolutions on the table about human trafficking. One is to expunge the criminal record, and one is to extend the timeline. So I want to see that all passed come Canada time. Don't give me a hard time on them. Just say yes. That's all I have to say. Kelly, any closing thoughts there?
I just wanted to share with our BPW colleagues and our panelists, business and professional women, Pauline has worked incredibly hard along with all our business and professional women to put together what I've spoken about in the national ethical movement for years. I still suffer to cross the border because of coerced crimes that never should have been, I've never should have done time for, never benefited from. And I continue to see this, and Gareth would be nodding his head with those that he's seen in probation and parole in his past, that they never benefited from a crime. It was coerced, and same with coerced credit. We have done a really great job in the province of Ontario of doing something and making history. And BPW was part of that 2 years ago, two sessions ago, when we went to Parliament in Ontario and advocated together in order to get coerced debt off the books for survivors, which I'm now part of a survivor-led team working at a Victim Services Toronto to inform. So we're doing it. We are doing it. You are listening. We are all learning. We learn as survivors some of the systems and the ways that we have to work to present things properly to governments or organizations and how to coordinate that together. Then we're doing that as agencies as well. So I want to tell you, stay the course on this issue. We do not like to pornify stories, as Alexandra said. We're not here to be the National Enquirer version. We want to be the Globe and Mail, or even better. We want to be highly informed, highly intelligent, and we want to be leading the way. So thank you to all that stayed tonight. Thank you to Pauline. Thank you to Gareth. Thank you to Kate, and to Samantha and Alexandra. And I can tell you, it's just the beginning of multiple evenings of conversations that are going to challenge you to think differently and think effectively of how you can be part of the solution. And make sure in 62 years, somebody is not taking my seat, saying the same thing like Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 wah. It needs to change. Okay. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much.
That's the sweetest
Good
bye.
job, Pauline.
There we go.
Recording off.